Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you can make it this afternoon for our program. My name is Aisha Dixon. I'm the director of the Emeriti Retiree Relations Center, which is right behind Royce Hall. So if I was on campus, I'd say hello through the window. But we're really great to have this speaker today. And this program is put on by the Retirees Association and the Emeriti Association. So here we have both program chairs, Steve Cedarbaum and Michael Heafy. And Steve, go ahead and take it away for your intro today.
Shirley, thank you. I'm going to introduce Kristy Edmunds, and I'm going to start by reading something I wrote about advertising her program. And it's a quote from some propaganda that they put out. CAP UCLA is the programming force behind the live presentation of contemporary performing arts at UCLA. We champion a bold mission for presenting acclaimed artists whose work invites us to experience the world through an inspired lens, end quote. Kristy Edmunds, our speaker, is the director, curator, and my words, driving force of that program. We're very lucky to have her. Now, Kristy is a world-renowned arts administrator who is the founding executive and artistic director of the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, artistic director for the Melbourne International Arts Festival for 3 years, and head of the School of Performing Arts at the Victorian College of Arts, also in Melbourne. After a year, she became a deputy dean for the college, and this sounds really pompous. Edmunds' robust career has included work as a visual artist, an independent filmmaker, a playwright, a director, and also as a teacher. I think we're very lucky to have Kristy as a speaker. So please, Kristy, take it away.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And thank you all for making the time to be here. You know, when I was asked to do this, it was really kind of talking about anything that we would want to do in terms of illuminating the program and various things like that. And I'm as interested in this being a dialogue as is absolutely humanly possible, especially in a Zoom thing. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or just raise your hand and slow me down. Stephen, thanks for the long introduction. It was a little robust, as it were. So, I mean, obviously I'm coming to you right now from Royce Hall, a venue that you know extremely well here on campus, and one that has been essentially closed for the past 8 months. It's literally me and the ghost light on the stage in a 200,000 square foot facility, with the exception of most recently. And most recently, what we started to do, as the programming has been, you know, suspended or postponed, some of it we were able to figure out a way to proceed with. And so what we've done is turn Royce Hall basically into a film studio. And we've been filming live performances, absent of any audience, totally socially distanced, between masks and plexiglass and everything else. And then we created an online, basically, channel. And now we are streaming those performance films out into the world. So it's been a huge amount of change and a huge amount of shift in terms of what it is that we do. My work now involves not just how do we continue to create a continuity around a mission for the public around contemporary performing artists in theater, dance, music, poetry, literature, et cetera, but literally how we work together across the world's stages, all of which are predominantly closed now, to think about what kind of restoration effort we're going to be able to mount in the future in order to create continuity for audiences to gather eventually and the artists to be able to hold on, be they in classical forms or contemporary forms, how we can share different kinds of approaches, strategies, resources, and mobility to be able to keep bringing a public towards what it is that we're doing, even though right now it's predominantly online. A little bit of insight probably into that, maybe I'll start with how artists are doing. Are you interested in that?
Sure.
You know, the thing with the performing arts is that the majority, not all, but the majority of how we resource artists and their livelihoods is in part through ticket sales. So when you don't have ticket sales and you've had your touring, which you're paid usually after you get off the stage, as it were, contractually, all those contracts when COVID came in, pretty much worldwide, utilized the force majeure clause, which says it's an act of God, there's no obligation, we'll just wait. Some institutions have a scale of resourcing that allows that waiting to happen, and you could reschedule for a year or more and then make right on your contractual promise. But for an artist to hold on that long without their livelihood, you can imagine the scale of this devastation, particularly in the US, where government support for artists of renown doesn't really exist. And the small personal loans, forgivable loans, ran out at the end of September. So what I've been doing a lot of is working for an artist to come up with other strategies that enable us to get resources into their hands so that they're able to continue their work, continue their practices, at least continue keeping their bodies, instruments, and from atrophying. For those of you in medical, you would imagine the amount of people who live, particularly dancers, in extremely small apartments, the ability to rehearse physically in full is extremely challenged, and where else they would do that, let alone the ability to rehearse together. It's gone for the time being. So a lot of what we've been doing is finding ways to create, with new technologies, rehearsal rooms that allow them to have an augmented way of seeing one another in a kind of false architecture, a virtual architecture, so they can at least keep up with each other and some of the patterns. We've set it up as well with musicians who are trying to, continue rehearsing their material together, whether it's a quartet or a chamber orchestra or an ensemble, which doing it through Zoom with all the glitches there's a time delay. So they're not only despairing about not being able to be around each other, they're despairing in that even trying to practice the music to the expectation of what the composition is, they distort through technology and they feel it. They're like, we're rehearsing the wrong material. So we've been trying to do a lot with the tech industry that can help improve the tools that artists are using in particular kinds of ways, as well as how we are able to generate access points for audiences, certainly locally, but worldwide. So if anybody has specific kinds of questions, I'm happy to go into them.
I can just ask everyone, you're more than welcome to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Or if you feel more comfortable raising your hand or using the chat feature, go ahead and do that.
Well, this is Steve Cedarbaum.
Yeah.
Kristy, I was very interested. Michael Heafy and I are running these programs, these after lunch programs, and I'm a worrier by nature, and I'm concerned about a fall off in audiences.
Yeah.
So are you finding that people just aren't responding to Zoom?
Well, I think there is a thing, obviously there's Zoom fatigue. It at least does something, but it does create a fatigue. There really has to be sort of a reason for people to jump onto them. And it's more of a meeting tool and an interface tool. When it comes to audiences, there's very few artists who are creating content in a Zoom environment. Instead, it's more like streaming on YouTube or on a thing called Vimeo. There's also a channel that they utilize now. It's called Twitch, where they can do a concert from their kitchen. It's usually soloists and things like that. And people can come view them and put, money in the tip jar and things like that. And so a lot of them are now earning their living, even if they're streaming from the back of their van or their garage or something. They literally will play for 12 hours a day to keep viewers on them putting small pockets of money into the tip jar as a means of them carrying on. So the audience drop-off that we've experienced from CAP UCLA is obviously severe. Many folks are interested in the social atmosphere, the cultural belonging, gathering in the lobby, going up to the bar, going over to the lounge, then going into the show, being with each other afterwards, and then so on and so forth. And you cannot replicate that right now in a technological environment. What we can and what we have done is created a channel. And that channel literally allows you, like if you're watching Netflix, but it's the CAP UCLA channel, and you can pull, there's a dance show, or we just streamed Astor Piazzolla's Quintetto from Buenos Aires, which is a pretty remarkable story, actually. It's not just here that people are in lockdown, and in South America, both in Chile and Argentina in particular, the government restriction on the population was severe. They have tanks in the city streets. The population for 6 months was only allowed to go outdoors for essential needs or leave their homes for 2 hours as allocated once every 3 days, unless they had a pet, and then they could take their dog for a walk for 20 minutes every day in a designated area. So of course, pets surged. Everybody got a dog. Anyway, while our venue was closed and the Piazzolla Quintetto was going to be here November 1st, and the tour was shut down, obviously, we spent the summer working with them and the Piazzolla National Concert Hall, the Tango Center, which is a beautiful, very old, 100+ years old venue. And we filmed the quintet there. So we set up a camera crew, they filmed their performances. We then took the footage, edited it together, and then we streamed it out to people on our channel on the 1st of November. And after which we had all the artists and Astor Piazzolla's wife speaking to us. So that channel goes out. We had over 3,000 people watch it. So 3,000 people is obviously more of an attendance than I could fit in Royce Hall. The difference is people don't economize it in the same way. They're not purchasing a ticket. And for the time being, to try and ask people, instead we ask people to make a contribution. And contributions people will either do or they won't. You're up to, it's sort of like making dinner, inviting 100 people for dinner and not having anyone RSVP and you guess on who's going to show up. It's a little challenging. But nonetheless, we're finding that. And what we're starting to see is part of that social glue where strangers come together in terms of I'll show you, I'll put up the channel for you to see. The thing that we're seeing is that people that we could not either reach geographically or physically are starting to show up. So in that particular day, we had people from Argentina, Chicago. There was a man from Stockton who works on a cattle ranch who also had joined in. They put comments in. We can see that there's an audience that's there, and the artists are also watching. And the artists are writing back to people as they compliment the violinist or the baritone voice or whatever is going on. The artist can really feel that there are people there and they're from all over. And so there's an interesting way that we're finding slowly to create a quality environment where the sound is very good, the lighting is really good, the artists are present, and the audience is able to find it without hardship. This is, of course, going to continue into the future, especially in LA. We're now, I have a lot of briefings from the people in the Department of Health, in the county, in the state, in the governor's office, and they're advising us at this point that until there's something radically shifting around a vaccine, we're probably looking at 2022 before the likelihood of audiences truly returning in scale. We can have 40 people sitting in Royce Hall, but when we do that, you can imagine what it feels like. You've got masks, you've got plexiglass on your face, you're sitting very far away from one another, you're a good long distance from the stage, On the stage, the artists have masks. They're separated by plexiglass. You know, the list goes on, and it kind of changes. It feels like we've all landed on Mars, to be honest. So then there's also the increased costs associated with everyone's health, bathrooms, cleaning everything, fumigating, sterilization. The costs become really enormous. So it's going to be a good long while before audiences of scale return. In the meantime, audiences are starting to also find things like this channel, or different audiences than we've reached before, really enjoying it. And as the technology improves and as we get better at using the tools, I imagine that this is going to continue to be something that people have as, or develop a preference to, over parking, paying for parking, walking over, doing this, poor lighting, crossing the thing, finding your seat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we probably are looking at a future where there's the return slowly of live experiences that are complemented with also a channel where we're streaming things out at the same time in order to reach people.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your program. Please go forward.
Well, where would you like me to head from here, Stephen?
It's up to you. You're the speaker.
Okay, well, I'll tell you a few of the other things. I mean, some of it, I don't know how many of you are predominantly music fans or predominantly, you know, jazz fans or predominantly dance or theater, etc. But one of the things that we also, our priority with the limited amount of resources that we did have and do have, which are coming predominantly from plan gifts and from endowment earnings from past contributors, is that we've really had to prioritize those creatively into the hands of artists. So one of the other things that we have done is commission. For example, we commissioned 25 US-based choreographers who cannot rehearse, who cannot tour, who cannot even be in a studio. They're in their apartments. To do a sort of love letter to the future of their art form through the vehicle of creating a new dance work on paper. A lot of choreographers and theater directors, before they get in front of the dance company or they start rehearsals for a project, they have a kind of planning map of how they would make their choreography, and those are called scores. So we commissioned them to make short scores. And then we teamed up with the Lapis Press, which is a fine art print studio here in Los Angeles. And they are making a print edition of these different choreographies on paper. Those are being editioned now as I speak, and we will send them out as a international tour of, like, an exhibition of prints that are the choreographers' handwritten, handmade, hand-drawn scores. So it creates a place where, while they can't function on a stage or in a rehearsal studio, the intelligence, the compassion, and the artistic sort of generosity of what they make still has a form of mobility. So that's another kind of strategy that we have put out there so that artists and creative makers are able to keep doing things. Again, so it's the digital and film on the channel, and then no digital whatsoever, handmade, editioned, and creating mobility for those kinds of projects as well. You know, the other thing that we've had to do is set up a lot of relief funds for artists. Many artists have become homeless. You know, they didn't have a lot of resources behind them earlier. These are performing artists predominantly. Obviously, if you're really world renowned at a certain place, you can sustain over that time. So a pretty famous composer, Philip Glass, is going to be fine. But some of the instrumentalists and some of the musicians from the ensemble are struggling, right? They don't have that same kind of earning capacity. They're not composing for films and releasing albums and things like that. So it's a very different kind of environment for them. And so we've had to really set up ways in which these musicians or dancers or actors are receiving kind of emergency relief funds, or we're creating environments where they can continue to perform and be paid at a limited scale so that we can keep the cultural continuity of these art forms, which are ephemeral by and large, and coming from the training, capacity, skill, passion, and interest of the, the people as instruments. And it's an incredibly important part of the work that we're doing at the center now.
Great. We do have a few questions in the chat. I will say we had a program with LA Opera last Friday, and I think it only worked out because the couple was married, because
Yeah.
it would have been hard. It would have been hard to have the vocal, and there was some minor audio issues when she hit a really high note that just don't resonate on an iPad or a laptop. So,
Yeah.
and that was the first time I'd seen live music in 10 months. So it was great. So for the questions in the chat, have you been able to connect with LAUSD to provide arts experiences for online schooling?
Yes. And hey, Joanne. Yes, so one of the things that the center runs is a long-standing program called Design for Sharing. Design for Sharing, usually we bring LAUSD students, schools, and classrooms to Royce Hall predominantly. They will watch a live concert experience or a play or a dance program. And we raise money for the buses and all of that, and it's free to all the schools. Obviously, schools are having Zoom school. Nobody's getting on a bus, and we don't have performances on the stage. So these films that I was describing that we've been making, we've been working with the teachers to help get the films of the artists into the schools. We've also had a number of the artists who are, by the way, world-renowned artists that normally would be here. We can still connect them to the schools. So they're teaching in the schools as well. And the interesting thing that's happening is that while artists from a stage are always extremely generous, and they are fascinated with hearing what young people are, what's on their mind, or old people, young people, whoever, they want to hear what's on people's minds and how they reacted to the work. What we're experiencing now with these artists, like the Kronos Quartet, or for example, Philip Glass and Sweet Honey on the Rock, last week did a program for us on for the schools, is that they're seeing kids and they're seeing UCLA students in their home environments. And they're seeing the irregularity of those spaces, and they're seeing the strain that a young person is under. And they're seeing how difficult it is for teachers, how difficult it is for young people and students, and how uneven their circumstances are. And as a result, I can feel the artists becoming more and more concerned with how they build a bridge for continuity to raise up young people and another generation, and not just wait for their own circumstance to improve. They're working on how to improve the circumstance of young people as they try and cope with the situation as well as move forward. So many of them are now doing like private tutoring on phones they're giving, like having Philip Glass give a kid in the 3rd grade piano lessons across time zones because that family can't afford it, but that kid is passionate about the piano. Those are things that our previous economy would probably not have made available, but now does. So we're trying to find these ways where the generous gift of empathy, compassion, commitment, skill, ideas, and talent, and share them as broadly as we possibly can. So those are some of the things we're doing in the schools. Joanne, we've also been able to work with public television and KCET to take some of the material that we are filming and then put it into the television free access broadcast channel so that the education teams have access to it through that, because many of these young people, they don't have Wi-Fi and they don't have computers. So it's hard to do Zoom school on a phone, on a flip phone in your backyard. And so there's also ways we're trying to create, with the assets we've been able to resource, access for the kids in the schools and their teachers.
Okay, the next question we have is, what is the status of the Crest Theater?
Yes, well, Victoria, there you are. So the Crest Theater is moving forward, everyone. I was able to raise, before the pandemic, money to acquire the building, and then enough money to start architectural, schematic, and seismic drawings and engineering and all of those things. And now I have the last piece of that campaign, but the goal is that we will go into construction and renovations on the Crest, which will become called the Nimoy, the UCLA Nimoy Theater. That construction process, if everything goes well, will begin in April of 2021. And then by July of 2022, the goal is to reopen it at that point. And I can screen share with you if you want to see some of the imagery of how the design is flowing. Would anybody like to see that?
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Great. So now I have to figure that out for a second. All right, screen share. Are you all still with me?
Mm-hmm. So we don't see your screen yet.
Okay, you don't see my screen yet. Hang on. Do you see it now? No.
No, not
Okay,
yet.
now do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There we are.
No.
So I'll show you some of these. This is how it's going to look on the outside, sort of, I mean, give or take. It gives you a sense of the fact that a lot of the architectural design elements are going to stay in place. This isn't doing a full-blown image palette for you, but you get a sense. It stays, instead of it saying the Crest, it'll say the UCLA Nimoy, but we're upholding as much of the historic elements of the space as we possibly can. I'm scrolling down through this PDF so that you can get a sense of it. This is a side section. It's probably a little bit hard for you guys to see, but it's a side section. So you can see there's a stage. There's flexible seating down here. The murals are still intact, kind of.
Wonderful.
Oh,
And then there's the fixed seating right there. So part of the thing is, part of the design is that it always will have fixed seating on a rake. And then down in here, it could be, we could extend the stage, or we could turn it into cafe seating or people who are eating. Up behind here is where the tech is. And then behind in here is an upstairs sort of gallery and bookstore. I'll give you a sense of that. So there's, again, the front. Here's sort of entering into the lobby area, which again has similar elements that are there from the renovation that gives it an Art Deco look, while we also restore it back to being a performance venue. So there you can get a sense of the inside, right? And then this is that upstairs area I was telling you about. And it has, you know, books, and it's another gathering place before the show. This is behind the stage in the green room. And then again, you know, back to where the staging is and so on. We've got it socially distanced. See that? Wasn't that clever of us? So yeah, I'll stop the screen share now so we can come back together. But yes, it is. Are we good? We're here?
Mhm.
Oh, all right. So yes, it is proceeding. I still have obviously quite a bit of money to raise. One of the things that is remarkable about it is that had we been able to get it renovated before COVID, it would have become a venue so that younger artists and more emerging artists and artists from throughout Los Angeles would have access to distanced performing in there and then streaming it out onto their channels or onto ours. And that kind of continuity becomes incredibly important, particularly for artists who are not, you know, their identities are not household names and they're not world renowned. They may in the future be. And as we look around Los Angeles, you know, the places where artists have been discovered or been or found an audience, you know, the Troubadour and Largo and places up on the Sunset Strip and various places around the city, they're closed. Some of them are not coming back. So this Nimoy Theater becomes an incredibly important part for artist faculty, for the student grads that are coming out with their degrees, for emerging artists in our communities. for other not-for-profit organizations to have access to a small space that is more affordable than trying to deal with the scale of Royce Hall. So I think it's going to become an incredibly important asset in Los Angeles as we get this off the ground.
Another question came through about how some sports teams are doing this bubble thing where everyone's in a bubble, and there was I guess a troop in Virginia that did the same thing.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that's sort of been thought out there about a conventional play with interactions in a bubble?
Yeah, with local artists, I mean, again, here, we are not able to have more than 10 people in an environment, no matter how large that environment is. And it usually means then who's on stage and the technical crew, even just to film it. So until there's an ability for audiences to come, and in certain states, audiences were able to return in small numbers, and in Europe, the same thing. Europe reopened, and what they would do would quarantine the artist.
That's not really handy.
What's that, Michael? What they were doing there is, if you're local, you can quarantine into a bubble. You basically are living together essentially for a period of time. Then you're in the stage. You do everything together so that there is not a infection spread, which is what the athletes have been doing as well. And then you can do your performances. The difference with athletics is that they have media streaming money. They have, they have different economies because they have television royalties and various things like that. Performers and tickets are going to be dependent on an audience's ability to return. So some of them are rehearsing and being able to create performance content, again, that they can stream if they live in their bubble, and they're doing it. For us, it's almost impossible except for with local artists. So Perla Bataya, who you may know, she was one of Leonard Cohen's collaborators and vocalists. She and her family, she grew up here in LA. She's an incredible vocalist and singer. She wrote a piece that we had commissioned called Discoteca Batalla, which meant the record store of her family, which in Venice back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the Latino community, working class, would go to this record store. It was a place to exchange news. It was a place to help recent immigrants. It was a way to, be in community. And she wrote a musical piece about it. So we filmed this 3 weeks ago at Royce Hall. All of the musicians had to be in a bubble. Then they came onto the stage. We had to re-choreograph part of the sequences because you could not even, you can't have crew and artists more than 10 people on a stage for filming or music recording or anything. And so we reshot the whole piece, and then we edited it together, and then we streamed it out. That streaming will run on television now, and it will run in the schools for Perla. And it's the same with theater ensembles. If they can find an avenue to live together, then it's great. Where it's challenging is if anyone has to get on an airplane. If we had to put people up in a hotel for 2 weeks to quarantine here, any budget would be out the door. While airline tickets right now are very inexpensive, they will start ramping up their costs. So the future economically is going to be a different kind of animal, for sure. And as we head into 2021 and the programming, for example, we do have a big project coming in with Philip Glass. It's his sonata, a sonata for piano. The woman that performs it on the piano, her name is Maki. She lives in Vienna. So we're filming it at a concert hall in Vienna. They have the ability to have a socially distanced audience of about 20 people in their concert hall. Philip, Maki, and I do a conversation after the film runs on CAP's channel. And that was to be filmed the day after tomorrow. Europe is going back into lockdown. They are being mandatorily quarantined for another month. So Maki and the crew and the piano, tuners and all of them cannot get into the venue. So now we're going to move that event into January. keep working to film it in Vienna at the concert hall, and keep trying to carry something forward. But it becomes very, very challenging when you're now interdependently linked to venues around the world, technicians, sound techs, crew, et cetera, camera operators, all of that. It's a lot, it's a feat of coordination. But of course we do it because we care about the audiences and we care about the artists.
Okay, I think there's another question. Let me see.
Several.
Hang on, there's a couple questions in there.
I see some, yeah.
Let's see.
So a question about the Nimoy. The seating capacity in the Nimoy will hover right around 225. It's still very small. It's not huge, but it's intimate. And it's the other thing that we're doing is putting the kinds of technology in there that reduces the amount of crew and labor that is necessary to set up all the lighting or the sound systems and things like that, so that the cost to operate it is far lighter on the economics of labor. And therefore, the ticket revenue is helpful to the artists that are in there. How do I put together a coherent program, even in normal times? Maybe I'll return to that in a minute. The delay on the Crest and the Nimoy is definitely due to both money and restrictions. So I truly do have to raise another like $5 million to make all the construction elements and all of it run through. And it's a very worthwhile investment long term. And so but we're closer, but that was one. Moving forward with it. Also, when you look at the scale of impact economically to UCLA, the chancellor's office was literally saying, we've acquired the theater. We're going to, build it out. CAP's going to run and operate it. It's going to be helpful to another generation, et cetera, all good. But if you miss your margins and we have to inherit any of that against the economic strain that we're also facing, maybe we just need to take a little minute. So instead it was, rather than proceeding with the idea that over 5 years we would be able to achieve the goal and repay the construction, now the goal is 100% funding in hand before a single construction worker walks into the space. So it's a different kind of pressure, I have to say, on my shoulders, but that's the reality for it, and the regents and everyone else. And with the amount of, I was on part of the emergency planning sort of task force areas for some of the campuses. COVID was coming in, and the scramble to deal with both the hospital, the influx of patients that were being anticipated, shifting students to online learning, shifting faculty to teaching online learning. I mean, what do you do with the lab animals over in neuroscience? I mean, all kinds of things. Sports, athletics, on and on and on was just huge. So it's taken a while to get that reality firmly grasped before it was like, okay, now let's go back to where this stands. But there's some people in the community as well now that really see, instead of seeing the arts, I suppose, as ancillary to our sense of cultural well-being, people really truly miss the offer of it. They miss seeing one another. They miss feeling connected to ideas. They miss moments of sublime kind of beauty and relief, along with the ways that artists share narratives to us that make us feel more awake to the world than we were without them. And that value proposition coming back into our culture as something that's been much more essential because it's been suppressed for a long time, I think is causing some people to go, oh, this is actually something I really want to help support for the future. So thankfully, there's that. Once we are back with live performances, yes, we will continue at the ACE and the Nimoy and Royce. It's just that everything will be less. By which I mean, and who asked this? Michael, you asked it. Part of it is this, the the reality of doing projects and programming at the ACE is also about, when live performances return, will be the same time as traffic returns, will be the same time as LA returns to its same logjam of trying to get across a city. And there are communities far and wide who it takes them 2 hours to find their way to Royce Hall, whereas it can take them 15 minutes to find their way to the theater at the ACE. So we will continue doing certain kinds of projects there that make sense. The labor costs in the ACE as well are nowhere near what they are in Royce. And that's due to how UCLA does that calibration for the venues here. But I think really what you're going to see is that there will be more, the majority of the programming that we end up doing will land very squarely and firmly in the Nimoy. And the Nimoy, it would be things like, instead of having, Keith Jarrett here maybe in Royce Hall for one night, he would be performing for a week or 2 weeks in the intimacy of the Nimoy, or variations on a theme like that. So part of why that Nimoy for a while will also become important is that artists have to rebuild the apparatus of their performance in live settings. When we filmed these concerts I was describing just 2 weeks ago, these artists had not seen each other physically in person, if they were in a chorus or in a band, for 7-8 months. When they saw each other and they were socially distanced to re-rehearse the material, the emotional impact to them was enormous. And getting their kind of rhythm and way of looking at one another and cueing one another to carry the music forward took them a long time, because emotionally, they'd break into tears at the fact of actually being able to hear their best friend's horn right there, that for 10 years they had heard almost every day of their lives and had missed for 7 months. There's a grief that's running through their practice. And the other is, can I still hit that high note? Right? Because when they're rehearsing, imagine if you're a jazz trumpeter. Well, you live in an apartment block with a bunch of other people and they're at work all day. So you can rehearse on your horn. You can blow your horn from 10 a.m. till 2:30 in the afternoon and keep yourself, your wind up, your pipes up, your way. Not now. You start blowing that horn for 5 minutes without a big silencer and blowing it into a pillow in your bedroom to practice, or somebody next door is pounding on your front door asking you to knock it off. So they have not had the ability to also fully release. So by the time we come back to live audiences and live staged environments, there's going to be a need for us to support artists doing their projects with a public over multiple days to gain their agency and fluidity and soaring capacities back. And that will be part of what an audience also experiences. We are all helping one another recover.
Yeah.
Makes very good sense. Good sense indeed.
Thank you.
So a question about, where was the record store?
Yeah, so the record store, it was called Discoteca Battaglia. It was in Venice, up from the beach area, up near, West LA. I can't remember the exact address. I can send it to you, but it was a really important place back in the day,
Was it on Lincoln Boulevard in
Yes.
Santa Monica?
Yeah,
I
right
actually-
over.
My
Yeah.
family actually owns that building.
You are kidding, Carol.
Lincoln and Pier.
Yeah.
My dad's store was there. He owned a TV store, and my dad bought the building back there in the 70s or the 60s. So,
Oh my God. Well, yeah, they probably would have been tenants there.
yeah, there are tenants upstairs and there's stores down below.
Yeah,
Rent
fantastic.
control building in Santa Monica.
Okay, well, I will send you the link to this film.
Yeah, I want to see it.
Because
Definitely.
you'll see she uses old photographs and a lot of the music, but she talks about growing up in this record store because the parents were working, they're running the retail
She
shop.
probably knew my father very well.
Yeah, she probably did. Yeah.
Sorry,
So she
didn't take away from the thing.
no, but she wrote an entire tribute to and her mother died 2 months ago of COVID. So it was extremely emotional to make the work, finally have it filmed, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a really important chunk of Los Angeles history
Yes.
and the gift of music and small mom and pop shops and what they mean in communities outside of chains and outside of all those things as part of a creative life, part of the tissue that's not just about making money, but about a sense of belonging and adding value into a community in small ways. Yeah.
Great.
Daniel, you're asking about the radio programs. And yes, in fact, we have been commissioning radio plays. A lot of the theater actors and even some of the Hollywood folks who you know, it's slow for the studios to come back to. They're not in huge amounts of production. So a lot of the actors are banding together to do and revisit radio plays or write new radio plays. We've been distributing certain things where they're like podcasts. So we've been recording podcasts with different artists and stories. And I mean, we don't have a radio broadcasting system, but we do have a podcast system now. We've had to invent one. It's not, again, all the things we've had to learn, you guys, in the past 4 months truly is unbelievable. We've had to become not just a presenter of content from artists in a theater environment, but we've had to learn how to be publishers, podcast producers, commissioning content, printmaking, filming. Glad I went to film school back in the day, in order to just keep continuity moving forward. And I think you're going to see more and more of it. Particularly in theater, the radio plays have been very important. We also have been running every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 1 hour at noon each day, a work of Shakespeare, a Shakespeare play from a group out of the UK called Force Entertainment. And they tell the story of Julius Caesar on their kitchen table through the plot, not the flowery Shakespearean multi-hour language, but purely through the plot. And they use props like this is King Lear or this is Hamlet, and they just tell you the story with what's going on with the characters. So I can also send you those because they're complete. Everything we've been doing is completely free. You literally push a button, it links, and you get to watch the content. So we've been having people, 25,000 people a day, each day at noon on the West Coast, watch these stories, and they have been remarkable.
Wow, that's great. We have about another few minutes. So if you have any other final questions, again, please feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you, Kristy, for taking your time with us.
Oh, sure.
We have another question that came in about what matters for the 10 question
Oh,
series.
yeah.
Would you be comfortable sharing a bit about your journey, where and how you grew up to your current fabulous work at UCLA?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. So I'll talk about my mother's side of the family, but my mother's side of the family, my mother was born on the Colville Indian Reservation in Washington State. She lived there with my grandparents in a trailer. They were Scottish immigrants who had intermarried, obviously, within the kind of tribal system, which is not atypical. You know, those Highlander Scots, as they immigrated across, had a lot of interconnection with the tribal systems of the native people. So she was, the early part of her life and my uncle's life was on the reservation in a trailer. My grandfather, their father's work, he had a propensity towards engineering, and he became a bridge builder, and he started working on building a lot of different bridges and infrastructure after World War II and the repairs up in the Pacific Northwest. So that's one part of my family history, which came from obviously extraordinary poverty and found their way through pockets of the American dream pursuant to being able to, you know, make the road easier for others to travel on because of my grandfather's bridge building, physically and metaphorically. My father's side, they were migrant apple pickers. They worked in the crops, also throughout the Northwest and Washington State. My father would ride the trains, pick apples, and then move to apricots, and then move to pears, and send the money home. And at the end of the summer, go back to where they were. And my mom and he, when they were married, she was able to put him through college, and he became involved in economics and banking and things like that, and so on and so forth. And so part of my life, and this is the part that probably matters, is that I come from obviously a working class background. I'm a hodgepodge of different cultures that live inside of my being. But in both sides of my family, and in that family heritage, is a kind of belief in which we are consciously aware that the 7 generations behind us are what put in the effort that made where we stand on the land and in the world possible at that moment. Their good luck and their bad luck, their effort, integrity, or screw ups or whatever, live inside of us. But you are consciously responsible to think of 7 generations behind you, and you are consciously responsible to think of the 7 in front of you. So the choices that I make in programming, in working with artists, in finding ways to connect strangers to different possibilities and ideas, is a way of trying to share what makes our humanity more rich. And it doesn't have to do with our financial largesse in my way of approaching it. It has to do with the caliber of our capacity, our character, and our willingness to love a stranger. And I see that living and breathing in artists, in people in the medical profession, and in gardeners. It's like there's a way of putting faith into something in the future that if you just try, if you work for it, if you give it, it becomes of useful purpose to another. You have to love a stranger to make yourself that vulnerable on a regular basis. And gardeners do the same thing. They put things in the land, they hope it's going to grow. It feeds someone, it moves into the culture, and it adds benefit. And as we've seen within the medical community, as we always have, but we see it now too, the willingness of people to stand on a front line of a global pandemic that is awe-inspiringly life-threatening at any given moment, to travel to places of hardship where there's an absence of medical workers to help, is the expression of humankind's love of a stranger. And how we try and carry things forward is what I try to do when I'm putting work on a stage. And it's part of what you do when you try and figure out new tools to invent ways of sharing that continuity, so that we can continue to re-inspire one another and be better at what it means to have equitable access to a life well lived.
Wow, that was the most motivating thing I've heard in the past week.
Beautiful response. Yes.
Yeah, that was very, very touching. Oh, that was moving. Any other questions? I'm asking a request for, if Kristy, if you can send me whatever links you're talking about, and I can share them with everyone on here.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Any other final questions before we let you have the rest of your afternoon back?
This is Steve. Kristy, thank you very much. I found your presentation amazing. I mean, who could have imagined when we invited you about the first of the year 2020 that you would be doing what you're doing, and from the sounds of it, all of this is new.
Yeah.
That it's not as if this is just adapting to a putting more effort into one part of your profession.
Yeah.
You've just had to invent this. Failure must have been staring you in the face on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Stephen. And that was that thing. It's like, if I'm afraid to fail, then I will restrict myself from trying. If I restrict myself from trying, then the access points of those that I'm interdependent with will have a gate shut in their door because I was too afraid to try. And that, to me, is the biggest failure.
Is this something that people in your profession generally can do? Or is this exceptional? I mean, To me, this sounds exceptional. There wouldn't be 1 in 20 people who could adapt.
It hasn't been the most dominant response to date, but I think once somebody can break through something, then you can teach others to do the same.
Yeah.
And instead of doing it on the basis of self, but on the basis of an ecosystem, on the basis of one another, then you want to open source those ideas as fast as possible so that other people can follow and do it. It's like my grandfather. I got to build a bridge.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's harder for somebody else to cross.
Well, that's right. But I want to thank you on
Thank you.
behalf of both of our organizations and of the ERRC. You can rest assured that this is not your last invitation. I can promise you that.
Well, I will come back anytime. And, for all of you too, you've had an entire life, active, busy practices. You contribute to society in different kinds of ways, hitting elements of retirement or being in a kind of alum role or various things like that. And now you too are coping with this COVID thing. And it's vulnerable making, and it's scary, and finding avenues so we connect and discover new things and keep pushing towards new knowledge is a really important thing. And I'm so grateful that you spent time and that you invited me to your forum. It means a lot.
Well, thank you. Any final words from anyone else?
Who's Judy?
My mother.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
I lost my mom a couple of years ago. So I'm always like, I'm with Judy. She's still right there.
Okay, beautiful.
Here, I'll quickly put up, while you guys do that, I'll quickly put a couple of access points up here for you to find me.
Okay.
Actually, what I'll do is put up the Shakespeare's for you because you can watch them anytime.
I think that's the one where they like use different household instruments or
Yes.
something. I think I put that in our last newsletter, everyone.
Okay.
It was Hamlet or something that was on there. So
Yes, now they're all
Better
on.
repeat it.
All of them are on. They've gone live each day at noon, and after they play, then they're on demand. So you can link on any one of them. You can watch Tammy the Shrew, or you can watch Romeo and Juliet, or whatever you want anytime. And they're really so beautifully clever. It's worth it. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Everyone
Fabulous.
have a great afternoon.
Have a great afternoon.
You
Thank you.
too.
Just before you ring off, we have one more this year after lunch lecture in December. So join us then for, where are we going?
December
Carol
10th.
Campbell.
We're going to Paris to
Yes.
explore a cemetery where many famous people
Père
lay
Lachaise.
down.
That's the City of Immortals with the Carolyn Campbell.
Correct.
There you go. So
And then in
that
January, we'll have our musical performance with the Latino jazz group. So keep your eyes peeled. There's more to come. And thank you so much, Kristy. As an old stagehand from Royce Hall, I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy each other. Stay safe out there. Keep the
too.
faith.
Thank you, Kristy.